A dire situation that draws global attention to a crisis that faces Southern Africa. Extreme weather conditions that are sucking dry water bodies in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, and South Africa. The rivers have been transformed into beds of caked mud, leaving very little water for livestock and villagers. Once a source of life, these places are now the dams of death for livestock. These cracks are what remains of the once thriving Mukunono River here in Rushinga. This is the evidence of what climate change can do to such water masses that once provided the livelihoods to various villages in this area. But this is exactly what we are talking about, that climate change and its vagaries are playing havoc with the water bodies in Zimbabwe. For example, this is what remains of this once thriving river, and it is only just months before it assumes the same state like this point where we are sitting. These are not only cracks, but they have become death traps for livestock. The situation is dire, extreme for the livestock, which is constantly trapped in these muddy waters, every moment staring death in the face. It is looking at me with that face that is looking for help, but help I may not be able to provide for it, because as I stand here, I'm actually risking also getting into the same condition with this animal. Dry spells, droughts, and drying up rivers is the grim reality facing African nations, a reality already having a dangerous impact on southern African nations whose water bodies are being sucked dry due to the extreme weather conditions, and slow-burning droughts wreak havoc on livelihoods. South Africa, for example, is first with a water crisis that is hit hard on water supplies for its largest city, Cape Town, amid forecasts that the city will run out of water by June 2018. Experts have described this moment as a day zero for South Africa, a phase when the city of Cape Town will completely run dry, forcing authorities to limit water rations to its citizens. Such is the precarious situation facing southern African states as they battle a phenomenon triggered by the El Nino weather pattern since 2015. Over the last 3 years, southern African nations have experienced drought situations of a high magnitude that surpass records of over 30 years. Zimbabwe is not spared the brunt of these devastating El Nino effects. In the extreme cases of drying up dams recorded in Rushinga district in Mashonaland Central Province, villages are left with minimal water supplies that can soon explode into a crisis replicate of South Africa's Day Zero. The situation is dire. Livestock, a source of wealth for villages in this part of Zimbabwe, is on the brink of total eradication as thirst bites. It's midday and the temperatures here are soaring. This kraal is empty. The cattle have just gone out for their daily graze and maybe to fetch that much needed water. It may remain permanently like this if the situation continues in this area. As temperatures continue to soar, so is the risk of food insecurity for many households. Experts say the El Nino weather pattern has affected about 41 million in countries including Mozambique, Madagascar, Malawi, Zambia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. The United Nations World Food Programme Communications Officer for Southern Africa, Gerald Burke, explains the situation that Southern African nations are facing.
The situation is very bad, in a word, or in two words. Governments across the SADC region are bracing for deeper and wider food insecurity in the coming weeks and months. We, the World Food Programme, expect that at the peak of the so-called lean season, in the run-up to the next harvest in April, 8 million people in 6 countries in the region will need life-saving support. Those countries are Zimbabwe, Malawi, Madagascar, Mozambique, Lesotho, and Eswatini. And of course, the situation is made worse by the fact that another El Nino phenomenon, which typically inflicts withering temperatures, is now hitting the region and is bound to make the current lean season harsher and longer. And of course, it's a stark reminder of the last El Nino, which caused widespread hunger just 2 years ago.
The situation for Zimbabwe is stark. Women and children endure long, exhausting journeys to fetch water as traditional water points and sources are severely depleted.
The water problem is huge. Sometimes we have difficulties accessing the watered bowls because most of them are now labor intensive. We spend so much time at the bowl, and by the time we get home, we'll be so tired even to read. We spend up to 5 hours at the bowl, and this takes much of our time from school.
The water crisis has little mercy for the elderly, who are also sucked in this web that leaves very little room to negotiate.
It is now a long time with this situation. The problem of water is now deep-rooted.
Rushinga's prevailing environmental conditions are sending many into panic, robbing them of that basic right to access clean water. And so, to avoid further chaos, a community plan has been devised. This borehole has become their only hope, but it is only just 3 meters deep, limiting villagers to only a 20-liter bucket per household.
We devised this plan to lock up the bowl. If someone gets water today, tomorrow they will not be able to return for another provision.
For those living away from this area, they face the mammoth task to travel at least 8 kilometers to the nearest water point.
They are in trouble. We are appealing to the government to implement whatever strategy they can to help us.
The toll of the water crisis is also forcing villagers to travel over distances of at least 70 kilometers in search of water points for their livestock, meaning more time spent away from home. Water is a precious commodity, and in the words of English poet W.H. Auden, thousands have lived without love, but not without water. The slow-burning droughts are being experienced across southern Africa is wreaking havoc on livelihoods. The struggle for water highlights a deepening crisis for southern African nations that calls for an integrated approach by the affected nations. It's a battle that cannot be won on one front, and it appears that climate change is gaining an upper hand in decimating the environmental relationship that binds southern African nations. The siltation crisis of Save River, a crucial water source for Zimbabwe and Mozambique, paints a gloomy picture of the water shortages staring southern African nations that may escalate within the next decade or two. Once a vibrant water body, all that remains of the once mighty Save River are pools of water dotted along its course. The sun setting cast a beautiful illusion on the once vibrant Save River. Now, this was a river that was known across the African continent, even on the global scale, as a river that carried so much hope, not only for Zimbabwe, but also the African continent.
Big worry is that southern Africa is set to get hotter and drier in the coming years because of climate change, as you say. There's one scientific forecast that says that 40% of the land under maize in sub-Saharan Africa will be unusable for that purpose in little more than a decade. Factors like rapid population growth and environmental degradation and deep inequality across the region compound these problems. And yes, young girls are disproportionately affected. They form, of course, 50% or so of the smallholder farming populations. Smallholder farmers produce most of the food in southern Africa, and yet they are about the hungriest demographic. So major problems, and as you say, water is at the heart of it, and ways need to be found for more water to be made available, whatever that takes.
Predictions for southern Africa are worrying as the region is likely going to face depleted rainfall patterns, according to Oxfam Zimbabwe project manager, Dr. Leonard Unganai.
Generally, predictions for southern Africa as far as climate change is concerned are that we're going to be experiencing drier conditions. And I don't think that is very surprising because naturally most of Southern Africa is inherently a dry or semi-arid region. So these projections that we are most likely to be drier in future, I think we need to take those projections seriously. We might still get similar amounts of rainfall, but we could be facing serious challenges in terms of how that rainfall will be distributed in time, which I think is very important for agriculture. We've been experiencing a lot of intra-seasonal dry spells, some of them very long. For example, 2018, I keep going back to 2018 January, almost the whole month was totally dry. And in some cases, the dry spell started in December and went all the way to the end of January. And that's really very, very harsh conditions. And to make matters worse, we are also going to experience higher temperatures. So when you've got higher temperatures, it means crops are going to lose more water into the atmosphere. And once that situation happens, you need more water to keep them going, yet that water might not be there in most of the times. So in terms of our adaptation strategies, we need to be aware of some of these most likely climatic scenarios in the future and plan accordingly. Small grains are going to be part of the solution, but not necessarily the full panacea to the problems that we're most likely to face. We also need to invest in irrigation development, although increasingly water is going to be scarce, but I think there are quite a number of strategies we can take to make sure that we are water secure as a region so that we can support our energy generation, we support our agricultural development from an irrigation point of view.
Southern Africa is faced with a deep water crisis that is causing social distress to the most vulnerable groups within communities. The emerging concern is whether countries in this region will be able to fulfill one of the major goals under SDGs to achieve gender equality.
To achieve maximum impact, we strive to strengthen the linkages between the activities under the CSP. This also means increasing impact not just for SDG 2, but for broader sustainable development. The SDGs, as you are all aware, endorsed by every UN member state and recognized to be universal in their application, fully recognize that an achievement of zero hunger, in particular, is only possible through a common parallel investment in initiatives that address root causes, resilience, and acute needs concurrently.
For these girls, fetching water has become a daily need which they cannot run away from. It's an assignment that they are fulfilling, but the more time they spend out of school fetching water, the greater the impact on their dreams and aspirations. Their story may become another edition of a boulevard of broken dreams for the girl child